Bradley Whitmore Jr. tried to make me disappear before breakfast on Friday, and by 8:12 Monday morning, his $780 million acquisition was frozen by a sentence he was too arrogant to read. That is how the worst corporate collapses start. Not with shouting, not with alarms, not with some dramatic scene in the lobby, but with a lawyer in a quiet conference room turning one page too far. The room was on the 31st floor of Whitmore Industrial Systems in downtown Cleveland. All glass walls, polished table, untouched pastries, fresh coffee, and expensive suits arranged around a purchase agreement thick enough to stop a door. Richard Whitmore, the founder, sat at the head of the table looking like a man ready to cash out 17 years of stress. Beside him sat Bradley, his 29-year-old son, newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer, white sneakers under a tailored Navy suit, smiling like he had personally carried the company from a rented garage to national logistics automation contracts. He had not. He had arrived 8 months earlier with an MBA, a vocabulary full of consulting phrases, and the family name printed on the building. For 12 minutes, Bradley talked about clean leadership alignment, modernization, and eliminating founder error drag. Founder error drag. That was what he called the people who built the systems he was about to sell. He used the same phrase on Friday when he put my name on a slide under Legacy Cost Center, stood in front of 200 employees, and told everyone Whitmore had outgrown me. Now he was repeating it for bankers. "We completed the cleanup before close," Bradley said, tapping the acquisition folder with 2 fingers. No unresolved dependencies. Elaine Porter, senior counsel for the buyer, was reviewing Appendix C when her pen stopped moving. The CFO noticed first. His smile tightened. Richard looked down at the table. Bradley kept grinning because men like Bradley mistake silence for agreement. Elaine read the section again, slower this time, then placed her pen beside the document. "This transfer cannot proceed under the current conditions." Bradley gave a soft laugh. "That clause is outdated. We removed the dependency Friday." Elaine turned the charter toward Richard Whitmore and tapped Section 9.4 with 1 finger. "You did not remove the dependency. You triggered the protection." I was 11 miles away at Ray's Diner off I-71, sitting in the back booth with black coffee, 2 eggs over medium, and my phone lighting up next to a paper napkin. 16 missed calls. Richard, corporate counsel, CFO, HR. 3 downtown Cleveland numbers I did not recognize, but could guess belonged to lawyers billing more per hour than Bradley understood. I did not answer. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted attention. I simply no longer had authority to solve Whitmore's emergencies. Bradley had made HR put that in writing. That matters. Paper always matters. I signed the receipt for my termination folder. I did not sign the release. If you have ever watched a company turn loyalty into a budget line, keep listening, because that one difference is where the story begins to turn. 17 years earlier, Richard asked me to build the operational spine of Whitmore so no reckless executive could break it for short-term gain. I was a marine logistics officer before I ever wore a corporate badge, so I believed in chain of authority, written safeguards, and boring procedures that protect good companies from ambitious amateurs. I built the platform, the client continuity map, the warehouse automation controls, the transfer protocols, and 1 quiet clause in the original charter. Section 9.4. Founder Stewardship, Transfer Protection. Back in that conference room, Elaine read the language out loud. Without Nathan Cole's consent or unanimous board approval before his removal, all protected operating systems were locked from sale, transfer, relicensing, or material restructuring. Bradley stopped smiling. I took 1 sip of coffee while my phone lit up again, because he thought calling me legacy cost made me powerless. What he had actually done was prove the company still depended on the one man he fired. "My name is Nathan Cole, and I learned logistics before I learned corporate politics. I spent 9 years in the United States Marine Corps moving equipment, fuel, replacement parts, medical supplies, and classified inventory through places where excuses did not matter. In that world, a missing signature was not paperwork. It was a warning. A broken chain of custody was not an inconvenience. It was a failure of discipline. By the time I left the service, I had 1 rule burned into me. Build the system so the wrong person cannot improvise with it." Richard Whitmore understood that when he hired me. Back then, Whitmore Industrial Systems was not a company with glass walls and bankers in blue ties. It was 12 people in a leased warehouse outside Cleveland, two used servers humming beside a vending machine, and Richard promising clients we could do things our software barely knew how to do yet. I was 36, recently divorced, sleeping 4 hours a night, and still carrying a field notebook because laptops fail, batteries die, and paper remembers. Richard had vision. I had structure. He could sell the future in a room full of skeptical executives. I could make sure the future actually worked on Monday morning. The first platform map was drawn on a folding table with a black marker that kept drying out. Our first warehouse automation client was a frozen food distributor in Columbus that needed routing updates within 90 seconds or trucks sat idle at loading docks burning diesel. I wrote the escalation protocol myself after a snowstorm shut down Interstate 71 and nearly cost us the account. Our first real manufacturing client came 6 months later. Their inventory system was a maze of old spreadsheets, handheld scanners, and managers who still trusted fax machines. I connected the pieces, documented the failure points, and taught their floor supervisors how to recover without calling us at 2 in the morning. That became our reputation. Whitmore did not just sell software. We sold continuity. When something went sideways, our clients stayed operational. Over the next 17 years, I built the client transfer map, the warehouse automation controls, the disaster recovery playbooks, the vendor escalation tree, and the approval chain that kept salespeople from promising features operations could not safely support. I missed birthdays. I ate dinner from gas stations. I knew which hotel outside Indianapolis had the quietest rooms during a deployment week. Nobody put that on a pitch deck. Nobody gave awards for prevented failures. But every renewal, every clean migration, every customer who stayed after a crisis had the same invisible spine underneath it. Mine. Richard used to walk through the operations floor late at night, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, watching the monitors with me. One night, after a failed vendor update almost knocked out 3 client sites, he said, "Build this place so even my worst future decision cannot kill it." He meant it as a joke. I did not take it as one. Bradley Whitmore Jr. arrived 8 months before the acquisition talks became serious, and the building changed faster than the software ever did. The first sign was the glass office. Richard had always worked from a plain corner room with old client binders stacked on the floor and a whiteboard full of renewal dates. Bradley took the empty office beside him, replaced the whiteboard with a digital strategy screen, and put a framed business school certificate directly across from the door so nobody could miss it. He was 29, polished, quick with a smile, and fluent in the kind of language that makes weak ideas sound expensive. He said we needed to unlock velocity. He said documentation was becoming cultural drag. He said experienced managers created bottlenecks because they were emotionally attached to legacy workflows. The first time he said that in a leadership meeting, I looked around the table and watched people pretend to take notes. They knew what he meant. He meant us. The people who still understood why the system worked. Bradley did not ask how client continuity was protected. He asked why it took 3 approvals to change a warehouse routing rule. He did not ask what happened if a vendor missed a midnight update. He asked why we carried redundant support contracts when a leaner model would look better in diligence. He did not ask why our largest medical supply client required a named continuity officer. He asked if the title sounded outdated. Every question came wrapped in confidence and aimed at the same target. Make the company look lighter before sale. I answered with memos. Clean, dated, boring memos. I explained that our support contracts were not waste. They were insurance against downtime. I explained that the approval chain existed because one bad routing change could strand refrigerated inventory across 5 states. I explained that client transfer rights were tied to operational stewardship, and that stewardship was not a branding issue. Bradley never replied directly. He forwarded my memos to his consultant friends with little comments like, "This is the resistance pattern I warned you about." One of those forwards came back to me by mistake. I printed it, dated it, and put it in my blue folder. That was another thing the Marine Corps taught me. Do not argue with arrogance when arrogance is willing to document itself. By the 3rd month, veteran supervisors were being replaced by people who knew dashboards better than loading docs. The compliance documentation team was folded into marketing operations because Bradley wanted storytelling consistency. Our emergency vendor list was cut from 12 backups to 4 because he said unused capacity looked inefficient. Richard saw pieces of it, but not the whole pattern. He was tired, distracted by buyer calls, and more willing than he used to be to let his son handle the future. Bradley noticed that, too. He started walking into rooms late, interrupting people with half a smile, and calling every objection emotional attachment. But the more he pushed, the more careful I became. Because men like Bradley do not just break systems. They make sure someone else is standing nearby when the system finally fails. The all-hands meeting happened on a Friday at 2:30 in the afternoon, which told me Bradley wanted the room tired, full, and ready to leave. That is when executives like him deliver bad news. Late enough that nobody wants to fight. Early enough that human resources can finish the paperwork before 5. They set it up in the warehouse training space because the main conference room was too small for 200 employees. Folding chairs, projector screen, lukewarm coffee, and a banner near the loading dock that said building the next chapter together. Bradley loved banners. They made layoffs feel like strategy. I stood near the back beside Maria Torres from client support and Dean Wallace from systems recovery, two people who had saved more accounts than Bradley could name. Maria whispered, "This feels wrong." I nodded once. The room had that pressure in it, the kind you feel before a storm shows on the radar. Richard was not there. That mattered. Our general counsel, Patricia Hale, was standing near the side wall with a folder pressed against her ribs, watching Bradley too carefully. That mattered more. Bradley walked up front wearing his navy vest, white sneakers, and the easy smile of a man who had never had to earn silence in a room. His first slide said leadership alignment for a scalable future. His second slide said reducing legacy friction. His third slide was the one that made the room go still. Legacy cost centers, Phase 1. My name was first. Nathan Cole, founding operations architect, non-essential founder-era dependency. Underneath my name were 3 supervisors from support, 2 documentation analysts, and 1 vendor coordinator who had been with us since our first cold chain client in Columbus. People turned around to look at me. I did not move. I did not blink. I pulled the black pen from my shirt pocket and wrote the slide title in my notebook exactly as shown. Bradley saw me writing and smiled wider. "I want to be clear," he said. "This is not personal. We respect the early contributions that got Whitmore here. But companies do not scale by worshiping the past." A few people gave nervous laughs because nervous laughs are what employees offer when rent is due next week. Bradley clicked again. A chart appeared showing projected savings. He had reduced 17 years of continuity architecture to a salary column and a green arrow. "Nathan represents a pattern we are correcting," he continued. "High cost, low flexibility, relationship-based knowledge that should have been institutionalized years ago." That line landed exactly how he wanted. Public, polished, humiliating enough to warn everyone else. Then he looked directly at me. "No hard feelings, Nate. You built a bridge. Now we need people who can build a highway." I closed my notebook. Not fast, not angry, just closed it. Because there are moments when a man tells you he does not understand the bridge is the only reason his highway has somewhere to go. Patricia Hale looked down at her folder. Dean Wallace muttered something under his breath. Maria stopped breathing for a second. Bradley kept talking about clean transfer, buyer confidence, and how removing outdated dependencies would make the company more attractive before close. That was the sentence that stayed with me. Before close. Not before improvement. Not before safety review. Before close. He was not modernizing the company. He was dressing it up for sale by cutting out the one part of the structure he had never inspected. And what Bradley did not understand, what nobody in that warehouse training space understood yet, was that my name was not only on an organization chart. It was buried somewhere much older, much quieter, and much harder to erase than a slide. After the all-hands meeting, Bradley did not ask me to step into a private office. That would have required basic respect. He had human resources set up a folding table behind the training room curtain, 10 feet from the loading dock, where the forklift beepers from the next shift kept cutting through the silence. Karen Mills from Human Resources sat there with a termination packet, a company pen, and the expression of someone who had been told not to make eye contact with the problem. Bradley stood beside her. Checking his phone like this was a calendar item between lunch and a podcast interview. Patricia Hale was not at the table. I noticed that immediately. General Counsel should have been there for a founding operations architect tied to active client transfer protocols. She was not. That told me Bradley had either avoided legal or convinced himself legal was a rubber stamp. Both were useful facts. Karen slid the folder toward me. Nathan, as discussed, your position is being eliminated as part of strategic restructuring. Her voice was soft. The language was not hers. I opened the folder and read the first page. Position eliminated. Effective immediately. Reason, legacy cost reduction and leadership alignment. There it was in writing, cleaner than a confession and twice as useful. Bradley finally looked up. This is not a performance issue, he said, like he was doing me a favor. You should be proud. You helped build the old version of this place. I turned the page. Severance. Benefits continuation. Non-disparagement. Full release of claims. Expanded intellectual property acknowledgement. Transition cooperation agreement. They wanted my signature on everything before I left the building. That was the part that made the room feel smaller. Not because I was nervous, because I understood exactly what they were trying to buy for the price of 12 weeks of pay. Did Patricia review this? I asked. Bradley gave that small smile again. Legal reviews what leadership prioritizes. Karen looked down at the table. I read the release twice. Then I picked up the company pen and drew one clean line through the sections I was not signing. Full release. Expanded intellectual property acknowledgement. Transition cooperation. Bradley's smile faded a little. That is standard. So is reading before signing, I said. I signed only the receipt page confirming I had been handed the packet at 3:18 p.m. on Friday. Then I wrote beneath my signature, receipt only, no waiver, no release, no transfer consent. Karen stared at the words like they had started ticking. Bradley leaned forward. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I capped the pen and slid it back across the table. No, I am making it accurate. He told security to collect my badge. I handed it over without argument. I did not touch a server. I did not copy a client file. I did not raise my voice. I walked to my office, took my field notebook, my coffee mug, and the framed photo from our first warehouse deployment in Columbus. On the way out, Dean Wallace stood by the operations monitors and gave me the smallest nod. Maria Torres looked like she wanted to say something, but I shook my head once. Not here. Not yet. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed with an email from Human Resources containing the signed termination receipt. Perfect. They had time-stamped it for me. At 4:06 p.m., sitting in my truck, I forwarded that receipt to my personal counsel with the original charter already attached. Bradley thought my signature ended the problem. What he did not understand was that it started the clock. By 4:06 p.m., I was sitting in my truck at the far end of the employee lot, watching the building I had helped build reflect the late afternoon sun like nothing important had happened inside it. That is another thing companies are good at. The outside stays clean while the inside starts cracking. I did not drive home right away. I opened my laptop, connected through my personal hotspot, and pulled up the folder I had kept for 17 years. Not company files. Not client data. Not anything I was not allowed to have. My own copies of board resolutions, executed charter amendments, legal correspondence where my name appeared as stewardship authority, and the original Section 9.4 language Richard Whitmore had approved after the 2012 vendor disaster. Marines do not keep records because they are sentimental. They keep records because memory gets challenged the moment money is on the table. I created one email. For sentences. No anger. No threats. No speeches. Subject, potential charter noncompliance, Section 9.4. I addressed it to Patricia Hale, Whitmore's general counsel, and copied my personal attorney, Malcolm Reeves. I wrote that I had been terminated effective immediately at 3:18 p.m. without prior unanimous board approval. I wrote that I had not signed any waiver, release, or transfer consent. I wrote that under the Founder Stewardship Transfer Protection Clause, all protected operating systems, transfer rights, relicensing activity, and material restructuring tied to my stewardship authority should be placed under legal hold pending review. Then I attached the termination receipt, the charter, the board minutes from 2012, and the original signed stewardship resolution. I read the email twice, removed one sentence that sounded too personal, and hit send at 4:19 p.m. That was the whole revenge, if you want to call it that, for sentences and documents they already owned. At 4:31, Patricia opened the email. I know because Malcolm's office used a certified delivery system for legal correspondence. At 4:38, she opened the charter attachment. At 4:44, she opened the board minutes. At 4:52, my phone rang for the first time. Patricia, I let it go to voicemail. Not because I was playing games, but because from that point forward, every conversation needed counsel. At 5:03, the CFO called. At 5:11, Richard called. At 5:18, Human Resources sent me a revised separation document with the subject line, "Updated paperwork for convenience." I almost laughed at that. Convenience is what people call panic when they want it to look organized. I forwarded it to Malcolm without opening the attachment. At 5:27, Patricia left a voicemail, calm but tight. "Nathan, this is Patricia Hale. We need to discuss your email before Monday's closing session. There may be a misunderstanding regarding the scope of Section 9.4. Misunderstanding. That was corporate language for we found the wire after cutting it. I drove home through Friday traffic, past warehouses, rail yards, and office parks full of people who believed their companies knew what they were doing. Mine had just fired the person named in the document controlling transfer authority for the systems being sold. Around 7:03 p.m., Richard called again. I watched his name glow on the dashboard screen until it disappeared. 17 years earlier, he told me to protect Whitmore from his worst future decision. I had done exactly that. The part nobody knew yet was that Section 9.4 was not originally written because I distrusted strangers. It was written because I had once stopped Richard himself from selling the company's backbone to the wrong people. The reason Section 9.4 existed went back 12 years, to a Tuesday night, when Richard Whitmore almost sold our operating backbone for a short-term balance sheet fix. Most people at the company never heard that story. Bradley definitely had not. Back then, Whitmore was growing too fast and bleeding cash in ways the board did not want to admit. We had landed 3 major clients in 6 months, including a regional medical supply distributor that moved refrigerated inventory across Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Kentucky. Good contract. Bad timing. Our platform was still young, our support team was exhausted, and a vendor from Dallas came in promising to take over our core transfer engine for half the cost. Richard wanted to sign by Friday. The vendor had glossy slides, clean projections, and a sales director who kept saying seamless migration like repetition could make it true. I asked for their failure logs. They gave me testimonials. I asked for their cold chain routing test data. They gave me a brochure. I asked who carried liability if their engine missed a temperature-sensitive transfer window. Their attorney said we could discuss that after approval. That was when I stood up in a board meeting for the first time and told Richard no. Not maybe. Not proceed with caution. No, he did not like that. Richard could be charming with clients and ruthless with obstacles, and that night, I was the obstacle. He said I was protecting my territory. I said I was protecting his company. He said we needed speed. I said speed without control was just a faster way to fail. The board went quiet the same way Bradley's all-hands room went quiet years later. Only this time, Richard still had enough humility to ask me what I needed. I told him I needed written authority that prevented any executive, including him, from selling, transferring, relicensing, or materially restructuring the protected operating systems without stewardship review and board consent. Not because I wanted power, because clients were trusting us with continuity promises that could not depend on a founder's mood, a quarterly panic, or a pretty vendor deck. Patricia Hale was younger then, newly promoted to general counsel, but she understood immediately. She drafted the language with outside counsel. The board approved it after the Dallas vendor failed a live continuity test in under 40 minutes. Richard signed the resolution at 11:26 p.m., tired, annoyed, but sober enough to know I had saved him from himself. After that, Section 9.4 became one of those documents companies forget because it works. Like insurance. Like backup power. Like the spare key nobody respects until the door locks behind them. For 12 years, it sat inside the charter while Whitmore expanded into manufacturing, cold chain logistics, and warehouse automation. Every acquisition deck called our platform proprietary. Every banker praised our client retention. Every buyer loved our continuity record. Nobody asked why it had survived so many bad ideas. Then Bradley came along and did what his father had almost done, only cleaner and dumber. He tried to remove stewardship right before transferring the protected systems. He thought he was cutting salary. He was actually breaking the condition that made the sale possible. By Saturday morning, Malcolm Reeves had read the charter twice and called me with the dry little laugh lawyers use when the facts are ugly but useful. "Nathan," he said, "they did not step on a landmine. They signed a memo saying they stepped on it. I looked at the copy of Bradley's termination letter on my kitchen table, the one that called me a legacy cost center, and felt no satisfaction. Not yet. Satisfaction is emotional. This was procedural, and procedures move slowly until they do not. By 8 a.m. Monday, Malcolm Reeves and I were already in a small conference room one floor below the acquisition meeting, waiting for Whitmore to run out of excuses. Malcolm had brought one leather folder, one legal pad, and the calm expression of a man who preferred documents to drama. I brought my blue folder, the original charter copy, Bradley's termination receipt, the all-hands slide Patricia had quietly preserved, and the printed email Bradley had accidentally forwarded months earlier calling me the resistance pattern. We did not need much else. At 8:12, Elaine Porter found section 9.4 upstairs. At 8:17, Patricia texted Malcolm, emergency board session. Buyer counsel present. Please bring Mr. Cole. Malcolm showed me the phone without smiling. Procedures are moving, he said. We took the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened on the 31st floor, the receptionist would not look directly at me. That told me more than any memo could. Inside the main conference room, the Victory setup had turned into a legal triage ward. Coffee untouched, pastries drying out, bankers whispering into phones near the windows. The CFO looked like he had aged 5 years since Friday. Richard sat with both hands folded in front of him, staring at the charter as if it had betrayed him personally. Bradley stood near the screen, jaw tight, still trying to project control. He saw me and pointed before I reached the table. This is retaliation, he said. He is trying to sabotage the sale because he got cut. Malcolm set his folder down. Mr. Cole has made no demand beyond compliance with the company's existing governing documents. Bradley turned to Elaine. He was an employee. Employees do not get veto power over acquisitions. Elaine looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the charter. Nobody rushed to help him. That was when I sat down. Not at the head of the table. Not beside Richard. Just across from Bradley. Close enough for him to see the same black pen I had used Friday. Patricia began with the timeline. Termination at 3:18 p.m. Friday. No unanimous board approval before removal. No signed release. No transfer consent. Protected systems listed in Appendix C. Pending sale dependent on transfer of those systems. Each sentence landed flat and clean. Bradley interrupted twice. The second time, Elaine cut him off. Mr. Whitmore, if the buyer cannot certify operational continuity, we cannot proceed to close. He blinked like the English language had become unfair. Then Malcolm opened my folder and slid the all-hands slide across the table. Legacy Cost Centers, Phase 1. My name at the top. Next came the termination receipt, with my handwritten note. Receipt only, no waiver, no release, no transfer consent. Then the email Bradley had sent Human Resources 3 weeks earlier. Remove Nathan before diligence so the buyer sees clean leadership alignment. The room changed around that sentence. Even the bankers stopped whispering. Richard finally looked at his son, not angry yet, just stunned by the shape of the mistake. Bradley's face went red, then pale, then blank. That is taken out of context, he said. I had heard that phrase 1,000 times from people who loved context until their own words provided it. Malcolm did not argue. He placed one final document on the table, the 2012 board minutes showing Richard's signature under the stewardship protection language. Elaine read it, then looked at the buyer's team. We will pause all closing activity until authority is resolved. Bradley stared at me like I had pulled a trick. I had not. I had brought receipts. And before that meeting ended, one more document would surface, the one Bradley had not known existed at all, and it would turn his bad firing into a board-level investigation. The document Bradley did not know existed was not dramatic. It was not marked confidential in red letters. It was a plain 12-page due diligence memo prepared by Patricia Hale 6 weeks earlier and ignored by Bradley because it did not flatter his plan. Malcolm introduced it by asking one simple question. Did leadership receive a written risk warning before Mr. Cole was removed? Patricia closed her eyes for half a second. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the memo, and forwarded it to the board packet while everyone watched. The subject line appeared on the screen. Operational stewardship risk prior to transfer. There was my name again, but this time it was not under a cost column. It was under required authority. Patricia had warned Bradley, Richard, and the CFO that removing me before close could create a charter compliance issue, disrupt transfer certification, and trigger legal hold over protected systems. She had recommended full board review before any employment action. Bradley had replied with 7 words. Proceed anyway. We need him out first. Nobody spoke after that. Not for a long moment. In corporate rooms, silence has layers. There is polite silence, nervous silence, strategic silence. This was the silence of people realizing the problem was no longer legal confusion. It was documented judgment. Elaine Porter pushed back from the table and said the buyer was pausing the acquisition immediately. The lead banker asked whether the pause was temporary. Elaine said, "That depends on whether your seller can prove stable governance." Stable governance. 2 words that erased the smile Bradley had carried into every room since he came back to Whitmore. By noon, the buyer had revised its position. The $780 million offer was suspended pending investigation, and an alternate valuation was floated at $410 million if operational authority could not be certified cleanly. Richard looked smaller when he heard that number. Not ruined, not broken, just finally forced to look at the cost of pretending his son was ready. The board moved fast after that because boards love confidence until confidence becomes liability. Bradley was removed from all operational authority before 3 in the afternoon. His company access was restricted to non-system areas. Human Resources was placed under review for processing my termination without legal clearance. The CFO was ordered to produce every communication tied to pre-close cleanup. Richard agreed to step down as chief executive within 60 days and remain only as non-executive chairman while the board appointed an interim operator. Then they turned to me. They expected me to negotiate like a man who wanted revenge. I did not. I wanted correction. Public written correction that my removal had not been performance-related. Restoration of stewardship authority over protected systems. A board seat tied to continuity governance. And one permanent condition: Bradley Whitmore Jr. would never again touch operations, client transfer, or platform restructuring. Malcolm slid the terms across the table. Nobody called them excessive. Nobody had room left. Richard signed first. His hand shook slightly, but his signature was still clean. Patricia signed as witness. The board chair signed next. I signed last, not because I enjoyed it, but because order matters. By 5:40 p.m., I walked out of the same building I had left 3 days earlier carrying the same field notebook and coffee mug. The difference was that this time, nobody asked security to follow me. Bradley was in the side hallway outside his glass office, boxing up branded notebooks and framed leadership awards from conferences he had attended but never earned. He looked up when I passed. For a second, he was just a tired young man in expensive shoes staring at a consequence he could not outsource. "You took everything," he said. Quietly this time. I stopped, but I did not turn all the way around. "No, Bradley," I said. "I documented what you touched." Then I kept walking. The deal did not close that month. The buyer came back later, under stricter terms, with governance protections written so clearly even Bradley could have understood them. Whitmore survived, smaller than Richard wanted, stronger than Bradley deserved. People asked me if it felt good watching him lose. That was the wrong question. The charter did not punish him. I did not punish him. The board did not even have to try that hard. All Section 9.4 did was make a reckless man stand in front of his own paper trail. And in business, that is usually enough.